Hey everybody, welcome back to the Wall Street Skinny with Kristen and Jen. So this is hopefully going to be our first video recording or video podcast, which we'll see if that happens. But anyway, this is Kristen here, and
I'm
here's
Jen.
Jen.
And so, yeah, now if you guys are watching this, we're going to post all of these recorded podcasts on our fledgling YouTube channel, which,
7 subscribers.
guys, we love you, all 7 of you. Hey, we started with only, everyone starts with 7.
0.
So, exactly. So, yeah, we're going to be posting the video recording of this podcast on YouTube. And when you see who we're interviewing today, or rather whom we are interviewing, you'll understand why we chose this as our first video podcast, because we are interviewing someone who is in the news.
Yes.
So we'll get to that in a second. But first of all, Kristen, how are you doing? I noticed that the background behind you is conspicuously empty as you prepare for your upcoming move.
Yeah. I mean, we're trying to declutter and organize a little bit. It is not going as efficiently as it should be, but we have 7 days left until the movers start coming and packing up all of our stuff. I mean, so it's getting real. And
Well, also you're showing your place, right? To prospective renters.
That's actually probably the bigger reason why. So we listed
God,
our.
hang on.
What did you do?
I had a clump of hair in my mouth. Like, what is going
Are
on?
you
Guys,
a cat?
I seriously, guys, like, okay, let's be real here for 2 seconds. If you're looking at me, like, this is we do not look like, I don't look like someone at least who like planned to be on video today. I spent the past 2 nights in the ER with my youngest son. And thank God it is not for anything bad. He is totally fine. But I got home at 3:30 in the morning, and this isn't like cute 3:30 in the morning, like when you're in college and you're like, oh my God, I got back so late. This was 3:30 in the morning after being in the ER. I'm exhausted. I just, whatever. So, I mean, this is us, right? Like, this is just mom life. And Kristen and I creepily decided to wear the same outfits today. So the company uniform is in full force.
Like, well, it's terrible too, because I feel like it's the Steve Jobs, like Elizabeth Holmes. Like, it wasn't even, I just really happened to like the color black, and I
look
love
like
aloe. Yes, we do. But no, so we were showing our apartment. It was listed, I think, last Thursday. So we show our apartment this weekend. The problem is that with 3 children, they just get into everything. So it takes us roughly 3 to 4 hours to clean up before each showing. We had one showing on like 2 different days. So collectively it was about 8 hours worth of cleanup.
Dude, I get it. It is no joke getting your place ready for a showing when you've got little kids. I remember
Because they just go in and take it all out. It's we call like Grace, like our 1-year-old, the destroyer. She just pulls everything out.
Right. Well, I think you guys will definitely probably have more success listing it vacant and maybe staged.
Yes. Well, probably.
So, anyways, I'm a zombie today, and Kristen, you're looking great, and we're working on our setups, guys. If you have any recommendations on equipment that we should get, we have been doing this on a shoestring budget, and the shoestrings are still intact. Okay, we don't want to break the bank here. Just if you guys have recommendations on how we can do this properly, I think we're ready to bite the bullet.
Well, we're definitely we need new mics.
But yeah, so onwards to today's podcast interview. So, Kristen, can you tell us a little bit about our interviewee today? Because this is someone that you had a very strong feelings about, very special connection to, and introduced me to.
Like a fangirl.
Yeah, exactly.
No, this is someone who I have been following for quite a while now. We've historically talked about how in this information overload era, we all need to find people that we trust, people who can synthesize data, break it down, and then explain things to us in an easy fashion. And so this person, his name is Mosheh. He is the founder of Mo News, and he has this amazing Instagram and podcast and like newsletter where he basically is providing people with the news, but again, doing it in a really good way, in a very smart way that is breaking things down. I think their tagline is we read all the news so you don't have to. And no, this is so exciting for us. And
and it's wonderful to find people whose missions I think echo ours in different sectors. Our goal here is to break everything down about the financial services industry in layman's terms and give it to you in digestible pieces in a kind of relatable format. And what Mo is doing with the news is doing that same process via social media, via his newsletter, taking all the news from different sources, synthesizing it down into bite-sized nuggets so that you don't have to go out in today's day and age, like you said, Kristen, and read 10 different newspapers and listen to 10 different TV shows and all that stuff. If you trust him, right? And we'll kind of get into that in the podcast about, trust in the news and in these institutions in the modern era. But if you trust him or someone like him, having that kind of facilitator who can synthesize all that information down for you is invaluable. Yeah. It's invaluable not only for you just walking around as a human, as a responsible citizen, but it's especially invaluable if you are in the markets and if you are in the financial services industry. Because the news is ultimately, at the end of the day, the lever that is moving markets, that is explaining why people do trades, and that is influencing how money changes hands and global wealth gets created. So so we're going to bring him on here in just a second, and we're going to work on this little video transition because full disclosure, I don't know how to do this not awkwardly as we're about to have someone's face pop in. So maybe we'll do a little fade out or something like that. I don't know.
Hello.
Oh,
hey, hi. How's it going?
Good. I was trying to follow the rules. You're like, not before 10 a.m. We're doing really important things on Riverside. And
State secrets are being exchanged.
Did you see the reports about Meghan Markle and what she was up to on her podcast?
No.
That her producers did the interviews on her behalf, and then they would have her ask the questions after the fact to make it sound like she did the interview.
Well, you can attest to the fact that not only were we sitting here fumbling and sweating and looking crazy the whole time, but
I vow that you were here the entire time and you did not pull a Meghan Markle.
Guys, we are joined here today by Mosheh Oinounou, who is an incredibly talented journalist who has worked all over the industry and now operates your own, Mosheh, you operate your own kind of news station, but via social media platforms. You also have a newsletter and kind of an associated channel, correct? Did I capture kind of the media universe that you've got going, your empire?
Yes, as of June 2023.
So I kind of the theme that we want to explore today, I mean, aside from just learning about you, learning about your background, is really, again, how we take the massive amount of noise out there and distill news from it. So, one of the things for me, I worked more on the sales and trading and markets side of the industry. Kristen worked more on the corporate finance side of the industry. Certainly on the side that I worked on, but also in corporate finance as well. It's so critical to understand what are the big levers moving the markets. I had no background in econ or finance or anything like that, but I really had to learn very quickly, okay, if this economic data release comes out, what does it mean for the market? And if the market doesn't move in that way, what does that mean, right? All of those things were much more important to understanding what was driving prices, what was driving trades, what was driving wealth creation, then understanding if you look into this equation, then, you've got the denominator, that stuff. Once you've got those concepts down, understanding what is driving decision-making and investing and risk appetite. That was the most critical thing that I was responsible for in my job. And I think it's something that really can't be taught in school. I mean, again, as an English major, my whole job putting together my thesis was all right, I'm going to flip through the Brothers Karamazov and look for the 5 quotes that explain what I'm trying to explain in this paper, right? How do you do that for the world? Only you're not looking through a 770-page book. You're looking through every conceivable news source, I'm guessing. How do you get your information? How do you get your edge? I'm sorry, I just asked you 10 different questions. Also, what's the secret to cold fusion? But
okay, noted. We'll tick off every one of those. I think we live in a time where I feel like you just mentioned, English literature. I feel like it's a Dickens novel. It's the best of times. It's the worst of times, right? We have the most information. We have the least information. We have the best information. We have the worst information. And that's sort of where we live in 2023. It's so interesting because even as I think officially I'm an elder millennial born in 1982.
That's good company.
Yep.
Okay, good. So I'm in good company here because we know a world before the internet, or at least
Yeah.
before the modern iteration of the internet, when like a newspaper was thrown on our driveway.
Oh,
Yeah.
my dad
Right?
loves with us and still gets a newspaper. But yes, there were those days too.
And there's something quaint. And by the way, we're like the last generation, like that will, every generation subsequent to us will never understand that.
Yeah.
Where your information came via ink and paper in the morning. So
Right.
we live now, and it's like, oh my God, there's just so much out there, which is great and yet overwhelming. Like I sit here with like 50 news apps. I like to start grand and then go small. And so, you know, I find, based on my experience in news, like what are the most reliable sources out there that I trust for my information? And this again speaks to kind of the old school nature. So there's wire services called the Associated Press, Reuters,
Yep.
Bloomberg, Dow Jones.
Yep.
And back in the pre-internet era, they were your first source. Like if you were in a newsroom, you subscribed to a wire service. They used to come in way back in the day. This is pre my time, via teletype, and then came online. And like they're just dropping things. There's a famous story during the Kennedy assassination. There's a wire service called UPI, which is sort of still around, and there was one phone available, and it was the UPI versus AP report trying to get to the phone to report the Kennedy assassination. Like Kennedy has been shot, and the UPI reported it first because their literal reporter was quicker to the phone
That's
that
a
was
phenomenal
available.
story.
And like it came via wire, and then if you were in a CBS newsroom, Walter Cronkite was reading it off the wires,
Yep.
and that's the way that it worked. And so to this day in 2023, like APnews.com, Reuters.com, Bloomberg.com, to me, you know, they have thousands of reporters around the world.
Right.
People depend on them for straightforward, as non-biased, nonpartisan as you can get.
Right.
Are the first places I turn. Then there's the traditional national publications that I think do a solid job: the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal. Certainly, there is bias in terms of their story selection, their headline selection, their photo selection. That requires a slightly more nuanced reading. Globally, I think the BBC does a great job. I think Sky does a good job in Europe. You know, Al Jazeera in the Middle East, but you got to read that knowing that it's the Qatari government that's reporting on that. So he is friendlier to Iran and Hamas and doesn't like Saudi as much. So there's like politics you need to read into the types of stories they're doing. And so, you know, I can go around the world and, you know, there's the South China Morning Post.
I'd love to act like I'm reading the South China Morning Post every morning instead of the New York Post. But
Yeah, the South China Morning Post is a SCMP. I think they do a straightforward job. They're out of Hong Kong, but of course, with China taking over Hong Kong in recent years, it's become obviously much more China friendly. They can't be as independent. So this is a long way of saying, you know, I have trusted sources in each region. And then, of course, regionally, statewide, if we're talking domestic news, you know, there's certain publications, the Tennessean in Tennessee, the Dallas Morning News out of Dallas, the Houston Chronicle, the LA Times. Now, some local publications have fallen on harder times. Just they've had such major cutbacks, et cetera, so that's been difficult. And the last thing, and this speaks to your world, financial news. They have to get it right because people are literally making billion-dollar decisions.
Right. Yeah.
So that speaks again to Bloomberg, even the way CNBC.com writes up stuff. They have to, and the Journal I think is this way as well. Like major traders, the richest people in the world are making the biggest financial decisions in the world based on their reporting.
Right.
You got to have the facts without the bias.
Right. Yeah.
And how do you, this is obviously an overwhelming amount of reading to process every morning. You know, it's funny, when I used to work on the trading floor, I sat down with a high school girlfriend at like a girls' trip, and she was working for Teach for America. And she was like, when you come in the morning, what do you do? And I was like, the first thing I do is I go through all the news. But she's like, but how do you go through all that news? How do you make, and I was like, well, actually, it's funny. There used to be this guy, John Dunnigan at Lehman Brothers, who would put together a sheet every morning called the Black and Blue. And it would be, you know, the headlines and everything broken down of all the most important articles. I would have a Bloomberg monitor, you know what I'm saying? So I would get the top stories that way. Like everything had already almost been condensed down for me. You are doing this independently, right? You are filtering all 80 of these sources into whatever it is that you're going to then say, hey, listen, I think this is the news today. How do you do that? How do you go through all that information?
I mean,
You're only one man.
It's funny. One of my first jobs, one of the first jobs you do at any journalism internship especially in TV. So I did an internship at ABC News and then Fox News while I was an undergrad at GW in DC. And they're like, monitor the news and let us know what's interesting. And like, literally, it was my first job.
So you build that as your first skill.
That basically, yeah. I mean, my first full-time job out of undergrad was as a researcher for Chris Wallace, Fox News Sunday. Yeah. And so he would host the Sunday morning show and have to interview, at the time, it was like Condi Rice and Dick Cheney and George W. Bush, and it was the war in Iraq and Katrina and whatnot. And I'd come in at 3:30 in the morning on Sundays. By the way, I was like 23, so I was going out all night on Saturday night. So there was no sleep.
Yep.
And I was like, oh, they're not going to smell the vodka. And then my boss is like, be happy you know what you're doing, because like I know what you were up to last night.
Yeah, exactly.
But at the same time, I come in there and I'm going through the papers, and my job is to make sure the anchor, when he comes in at 6 a.m., like, okay, how are we updating our interview with, Vladimir Putin or Dick Cheney about? And I'm like, okay, well, they're reporting this. He's like, I don't care. They're reporting this. Oh, that's interesting. They're reporting this. And so a lot of my initial training was literally trying to read the world, summarize it for a boss, and then get feedback from these professionals as to like what mattered, what didn't matter, what was the inherent bias of the reporter. I mean, because it's not as simple as the publication. We just discussed publications, right? Yeah. Sometimes there's a great reporter at a publication you wouldn't otherwise look at. And sometimes there's a terrible reporter at a great publication. Yeah. And so, and I know that most people just don't have the time to do this sort of thing. Yeah. And that is why this sort of started out of COVID. Kristen, we were talking earlier. Yeah. COVID was the first time I wasn't working at a major news organization in 15 years. Right. I'd gone into consulting, was trying to figure out what I was doing next. I was thinking about documentaries. I needed a break. Yep. I left in 2019. Yep. 9 months later, I find myself on the couch like everybody else, like watching Fauci briefings and Trump and Cuomo and whatever's going on. And I'm like, wait, where are all my news sources? Where are my internal emails from the news division? Yeah. Oh, I don't have it. And I'm freaking out.
And now you're in the part of like a regular person who's watching all this stuff too, being like, whom do I trust? What is real? How is there no one consensus of information on what should be a very straightforward thing? Yeah. So that's how your media empire was born.
It was born on a necessity. And frankly, some people are like, well, why did you start on Instagram? I was like, well, I didn't intend for this to be a thing. Like, this was a boredom exercise in March of 2020. And kudos to my wife, then girlfriend. I was doing it privately for like 500 friends and family. My Instagram account was like locked, right? And she's like, this would be really helpful to people.
Oh, that's
because
awesome.
it's helpful to our family. Yeah. And I was like, oh, I don't know about opening it up. But I open it up, and suddenly I'm like 500, 1,000, 2,000, 5,000, Joe Jonas, Nick Jonas. And I'm like, what just happened here? And so what was really an exercise for friends and family to like help calm tensions and try to get at the bottom of stuff became, like, this is not the thing before the next job. This is
the next job.
And honestly, I have this love-hate with Instagram because we're succeeding or have succeeded despite Instagram's goal of like not having news around. They want things to be happy, like TikTok,
or not just the
they
information.
Want the trends to start there, and they're like, oh, what is Mosheh's account reporting on? Abortion and death and war.
At least you're not explaining how a rate lock works. I mean, just scintillating stuff.
But I mean, again, that's the thing that's so surprising is on TikTok we have these videos of like, let's explain a DCF, and it's like a 3 to 4 minute video, and it like does great. Or Jen like explaining a rate lock, and people are like loving it. And then we put it on Instagram. It's like womp womp. I don't know. It's just so funny.
It's interesting. I saw recently the top 10 accounts on each of the platforms: YouTube, Facebook, TikTok, Twitter, Instagram. And you can probably recognize 9 out of 10, if not 10 out of 10 of the names, on Instagram, right? It's like Kim Kardashian.
Yeah, right. That's what
Ronaldo. And you go over to TikTok and you're like, I might know 3 of these people.
Right.
So the TikTok algorithm has just been so successful in elevating people for
random
their content.
unknowns.
Well, so when I was working at my old firm, I would do a lot of diversity programs, and I would go to, for example, like a Blackstone, and we would do a diverse women leaders. I had a bunch of students who did these courses, And they found me independently later on TikTok. Like I would get these LinkedIn messages like, hey, I saw you at Blackstone and then now I've found you on TikTok.
Now
like,
you're dancing on the internet. Are you okay?
But it's crazy that it is finding people. The algorithm is crazy how it's able to actually find people that want the information. It's
right, and
scary.
Congress is investigating it.
I know. Yeah.
Scary good.
It is scary good. But for now, I'll take
we'll
it.
all hop over to, I don't know, Tinder or something and start giving the news there.
But yes.
My friends have joked. They're like, when are you starting your OnlyFans news account?
That's awesome.
Oh my gosh.
We found that in thinking about crafting today's episode, so much of what you do with your coverage of the news is what we're trying to do with Wall Street, is break things down in layman's terms and distill what information you actually need to know. How do you, take all of the noise and distill it down to, an actionable idea or a theme or a concept. And that's what we're trying to do for people is you could go read, Fabozzi's Handbook to Fixed Income Securities until you're blue in the face. And I don't think you're going to know how to trade an interest rate swap if you do that.
I just follow what Jim Cramer says.
You mean the opposite of what Jim Cramer says, right?
I love the anti-Jim Cramer thing.
So I understand that you worked at Bloomberg during the financial crisis of 2008. Can you talk to us a little bit about what that experience was like?
Well, it was so interesting. So let's back up here. So I'm at Fox News. I was a political reporter on the campaign trail. I was assigned to the presidential campaign of one Rudy Giuliani. Traveled with him for 4 months. People forget he ran for president. And in August of 2007, I remember this poll because I chose Rudy. Fox is like, they give me first dibs on the Republicans. And I was like, who's leading the field? Rudy had 44% of the vote. And this is why every time
Rudy was a totally different figure in New York back in the day than he is now.
I would travel with him as the Fox reporter, and the people seeking his autograph to sign baseballs. I mean, this was the post 9/11 Rudy.
Right. Yeah.
He was a hero.
Yeah.
And it was interesting as we traveled to Florida on these campaign events. And I'd ask around. I was like, so you're going to vote for him? They're like, oh, I'm a Democrat. Well, I'm a Democrat. Well, I'm a Democrat. And I talked to his campaign manager. I was like, you have 300 people in the room, but none of them can vote for him. Do you see that as a problem?
They just like him.
And they're like, no, he'll be fine. Well, it wasn't fine.
Right.
Spoiler alert.
And so, spoiler alert, Rudy's not fine in so many ways. And so then I'm assigned to John McCain and travel with John McCain. Cool. He's the nominee. Eventually travel with him and Sarah Palin. And the collapse really first hits my radar screen in September of 2008. Right? The market's falling apart. There's Lehman Brothers. Because Bear had happened, didn't really kind of hit the mainstream. Yep. And Lehman hits in September. And we're watching, and I'm like, oh my God, I think I took AP macro in high school. I had taken no business courses in college. I'd ended up getting my master's in security policy. So you want to conflict resolution, diplomacy, I'm good. You want to, I'm like, that seems significant what's happening in the market.
Prices up, yields down. Got it.
And I'm a 26-year-old campaign reporter with the ability to ask the question of the, I'm at the presidential debates. I got Obama there. I got McCain there. And I'm like, oh my God, I need to get smart really quickly on this. And what's interesting is, first of all, there was no time. The world, it was too late, Mosh. You can't, I was known in college for studying the night before. I can't study the night before. This requires a lot of knowledge. But you also realize that our politicians also had no idea.
They were in the same boat. Yeah. They were in the same boat.
Yeah.
I remember Congress voting against Bush's initial bailout and then the market punishing. And we're on Capitol Hill, and I'm running around the Capitol because McCain and Obama returned to the Capitol because they were both senators at the time to try to come up with the first bailout to save the economy. And Hank Paulson is the whole world is going under. We're going to face a Great Depression here. And you got Brent Bernanke, the Fed Reserve Chair, who's a historian of the Great Depression. And he's saying this has echoes. And you're like, oh my God. And we don't know what to ask. Most of the politicians don't know what to say. They haven't been following this stuff.
Right.
And, that was a remarkable wake-up call. Where you're like, oh, the emperor has no clothes. It's the Wizard of Oz.
The inmates are running the asylum. They have no idea how these securities work. And by the way, most of the people within these banks don't even know how these securities work, even at the elite level, because they specialize in something else. So, there's 10 people globally who understand what's going on.
Right.
So somehow the world is still here, right? And that's the spring of 2009, and a mentor of mine goes to run Bloomberg Television. He's like, come aboard here. And I was like, well, I have no background in any of this stuff. I've been trying to figure it out along with our politicians on Capitol Hill.
If only you had a podcast to listen to.
It was 08. Who had a podcast then?
That's true. That's true.
And so I get to Bloomberg, and now I'm running global international coverage for Bloomberg Television out of New York in June of 09. So
crazy.
Market bottom was and by the way, like, I'm still figuring it out. And so now I have the smartest, I mean, people don't know much about Bloomberg. Like, some of the smartest human beings work at that organization.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Some of the smartest reporters around the world. And like, Bloomberg has thousands of reporters. They have, I think at the time we were in 85 countries, 110 bureaus. I know it's more because when I was there, they were expanding to Mongolia, like literally a reporter everywhere. Because the people making the biggest financial decisions have to depend on the Bloomberg terminal, computer, and the network for, the coverage.
Yep.
And so I then just immerse myself with all these reporters who are like, let me explain to you what shorting is. Like, I needed the real 101 of the markets, and to be taken seriously at a place like Bloomberg.
Yeah.
If you can't speak the language of that place, like, you're not going to make it.
Yeah.
That is crazy. And then I remember you also saying that you covered Fukushima, right?
Yes.
Were you in Japan for that, or were you on the ground here? Oh, so you went to Japan
First
to cover
flight.
Fukushima.
Oh, wow.
So I'm running like global foreign coverage for Bloomberg Television. So that entails, what do we got coming out of Beijing? What do we got coming out of Europe? What do we got coming out of Dubai, Brazil, etc. every day that's relevant to the American trader, the American audience. So it's like the rise of BRICS, Dubai debt crisis, Greek debt crisis. So there's some financial heavy stuff, but then some stuff's larger than that. So there's the massive earthquake in Japan. In fact, in the first few hours, they closed Narita, they closed the airport in Tokyo because there was a crack in the runway. So we're waiting on the tarmac here at Newark. I remember we got a couple seats, and 2 rows ahead of us with Anderson Cooper.
Oh, cool.
We're deploying at the right time.
We're in good company.
Anderson. And so we get there thinking that we're covering the aftermath of a tsunami. We land there 18 hours later and discover that the nuclear reactor is having issues.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's a very slow drip of information initially. So we're like, you know what? We're not going to go north. We're going to hang out in Tokyo, which happens to be, like 50 or so miles south of the nuclear reactor in Fukushima, 50 to 100 miles. And we start to get that. And then we realize that there's a couple storylines. One is the supply chain. This is early heads up, kind of pre-COVID, on how our world requires every country to be functioning for things to be made. So Toyota's like, well, we have a factory in northern Japan that does this. We have something out in western Japan that does this. Like Toyota and then a bunch of American auto manufacturers. Again, this is the Bloomberg angle. We always have to find the Bloomberg angle here. Are saying, the earthquake impact here is going to impact the supply chain, and certain things are going to be delayed here. So we're covering that story. But then the nuclear story continues to bubble, because initially the Japanese were playing it down.
Right.
And it's not quite Chernobyl if you've seen the HBO series.
Oh, yes.
But definitely in retrospect, like, it felt similar to Chernobyl if you look back at it. Like, Jim's like, it's not a thing. Like, you can go. And I remember the Japanese government saying media can go within, a certain number of kilometers of the nuclear power plant.
Okay.
And the American embassy was like, don't listen to the Japanese. That's too risky. Don't get, you need to be double the distance, the Japanese are saying. And then I have like my Jewish mother at home in Chicago. It's like, what are you doing over there? And like, I hear there's radiation and yada, yada, yada. And I'm like, well, I gotta cover the story, and, we gotta see how close we can get. But at the same time, we were like, well, could there be like an explosion? Like, it's not, there's a lot of chaos happening there. Anyway, needless to say, at some point, Tokyo, they tell all elderly and young kids to leave the city. And Tokyo is not an insignificant city. I mean, it's like 20 million plus people if you count the suburbs.
Yeah.
So everyone gets on a train. We go down to Osaka, and we're covering things from southern Osaka, which is just like it's like going to, if you were in New York, it's like going down to Baltimore to cover a situation outside New York. And so we were there for a couple of weeks covering that. But I remember we had reporters, some who like freaked out a little bit, who were like, I can't cover this. Like, I need to leave the country. It was very touch and go, because again, when you didn't have assurances from the authorities, I mean, it's sort of like similarity to the '08 financial crisis. Like, even the people in charge don't quite know what is happening here.
Right. Well, it's funny because we were, I was on the trading floor at Morgan Stanley at the time, and, we were trading the headlines, right? So, and we all of a sudden had to become like amateur nuclear scientists, which I'm not, right? And so, I remember there was a treasury auction, and you're watching the price action going into it, and something is happening. Like the market is rallying and everyone can't figure out what's going on, and the bond market rallies when there is a risky event, right? People have a flight to quality trade, they buy the safest assets, and everyone's looking for headlines. And I'm watching the Reuters ticker, and there's this tiny little headline in there, and it was something about one of the reactors. And so maybe it was you. I don't know, like maybe it was your headline. I don't know, coming from Bloomberg or something.
Oh no,
like
it depends
that.
on how much money you made.
So I'm sitting there, and everyone on the trading floor is starting to freak out, and I was like, whatever. I'm 25 years old at the time. I was like, excuse me, like there's this headline, and like everyone suddenly like goes dead quiet, and they're like, what? And I'm trying to read this headline, and it's some like extremely technical thing, but I guess like one of the reactors like was on the precipice of a meltdown. And it was like, reactor 3 or whatever is about to, and they're like, what are you trying to say? Spit it out. And like, I mean, the market's like whoosh. And it was just, and I was like the one to like break the headline on the trading floor at Morgan Stanley. And it was, I almost peed my pants. I was so terrified. Everyone's standing there yelling at me. I'm red-faced, like trying to read this itty-bitty little headline. So like that's what's happening on the other side, right? You guys are in there real time being like, okay, we're going to put this out. We think the market's going to react. And we're on the other side. And a headline like that comes through that one of these reactors is going to go. Yeah. And it's like everyone is just like, buy. It's nuts.
Yeah. And the thing is, like, you have to figure out like who you can trust, or is it a low-level person who doesn't know what they're talking about?
It's the 25-year-old analyst who's like scrambling to read, who's like, ah.
So I'm the 25-year-old like producer in the field talking to the 25-year-old Japanese like nuclear deputy whatever. Like you're reacting.
Being read by the 25-year-old English major who like suddenly is struggling to figure out what words mean.
Lesson in life, everybody. There's a bunch of kids running the world.
Exactly. Seriously.
Right.
Despite all the elderly people who are actually in the leading positions.
Yeah. That's a bunch of us just fumping around.
I first heard about you from a mom's group, which is kind of funny. I know your wife is pregnant, which congratulations, and you obviously as well. I heard about you, I think it was during COVID, and then I think with the Ukraine war, the whole Russia invasion, it was so scary. I think, especially living in New York City. I mean, I was pregnant at the time too, and I wanted to understand like what was going on. Is this like a World War III situation? And I just so appreciated how you broke down everything. It wasn't just like, troops are invading. It was like, let's actually explain this whole backstory, explain everything. And anyway, I've been a regular follower.
I'm glad I was right that it was not World War III, despite other people saying. Like, I'm like 99.9%. I'm pretty sure Putin is just bullshitting on the nuclear stuff.
Yes.
Like, I wasn't gonna say like 0.1% we might all die, but like 99.9% Putin, like nobody has like, unless he's completely lost his mind, like he's not going to destroy the world through nuclear weapons.
Right.
So I'm glad I was right about that. But yeah, no,
Same.
But I remember Manhattan had this ill-timed, like updating what to do in a nuclear attack.
Oh gosh.
Like,
yes.
And
yes.
I was like, you imbeciles.
Yes.
Like,
yes.
Like,
yes.
really, you chose. And it's so funny because in my experience covering government, 9 times out of 10 is just pure incompetence and not like, something larger. But to the conspiracy-minded among us, they're like, well, clearly we're preparing for nuclear war. I'm like, no, New York City just didn't get its act together and picked a terrible
That's
time.
hilarious. They're like, well, it was scheduled for that day, so why would we change it?
And TikTok,
So
right? Stuff that will be.
And I was like, what is this,
we had like one video that did well
shelter,
on Instagram, and then like,
first of all,
flopped on TikTok.
What
but
to
most
do
of
in
the
case
stuff
of
that
a
does
nuclear
well on
attack?
TikTok, I don't know.
We
it's
don't
really
need.
stretched.
Anyway, sorry. There's not much you
No,
can do. Yeah.
The thing that's crazy too, and Jen and I have talked about this because
That is
episode of
so
Iron Man
cool.
on Netflix.
yeah,
There's
that is
I mean,
amazing.
who wants to live in that world anyway?
Yeah,
Let's
I
be
know.
clear.
And so back to something you talked about that was, especially salient, obviously, in the post-COVID years. How do you manage kind of like the general, I think, especially with the American public's distrust of the news now in kind of the modern era after the past, call it 5 to 8 years?
You know what's so interesting is that, like, if you track like the kind of collapse of trust, it's happened across organizations for the better part of 2 decades. I feel like in the U.S., like you can begin with like 9/11 was a shock to the system, right? Like
Right.
that wasn't supposed to happen. Who should I be? Wait,
Yeah.
the CIA didn't know what was going on and allowed a dozen plus hijackers into the country. Ooh.
Right.
Then there was the war in Iraq, and it's like we were told that Saddam had nuclear weapons and we need to launch this whole war and invade this country.
Yeah.
And what do we find a year later? Oh, actually, the whole premise for the war was
Bad data.
nothing.
Whoops.
Yeah.
Bad
Yeah.
data.
Yeah.
Bad data.
Yep.
Pound ref.
And and so and then you fast forward and you've seen the collapse of trust in the FBI and most recently the CDC and the FDA and generally government, and then there's certain people for political advantage who take advantage of that, being like, you can't trust them,
Right.
the systems are broken and they're out to get you.
Right.
And it does come at a time where like social media has risen. So you're seeing the critique of things in a way that we've never seen before, right?
Right.
And for good and for bad, right? Organizations and authority figures should be critiqued and should be questioned. And, I think it is important that people can say, hey, New York Times, you got this wrong. Hey, Washington Post, you got this wrong. Hey, Moshe, you got this wrong. I don't think I realized, though, the extent to which people distrusted the media until I left the media. Like, you don't get it when you're inside the bubble. Like,
Yeah.
I was still at CBS News a couple years ago, and actually, this is even pre-Trump. We had like a commercial we were running, being like, "Real news, CBS News." And we're like, oh, if we just like run that ad over and over again, like people will be like, oh, it's real news.
If we
it's
say
CBS
we're
News.
real, we must
Yeah.
be.
Yeah.
I once worked in an organization called Fox News where we said fair and balanced, we're fair and balanced, and people actually repeated it back. So there is a tried and true tactic. If you repeat it enough,
Yep.
people may believe it.
Yep.
But I think that we entered an era in recent years, and I think there's a lot of reasons here. Some of it is journalists' fault themselves. Some of it is just the nature of the mediums that we're getting our information on. The people have lost trust. And so how do I navigate this? I start doing this individually, and people are like, listen, we really trust what you're saying. And I'm like, yeah, but I just like summarized this guy's story. They're like, yeah, but like through your lens, like I appreciate that. I trust it. I don't know if I trust it directly from them.
Yeah.
Like, oh my God, what has happened here? And, I think that there is this larger organizational distrust, which is, by the way, a challenge we need to figure out as a democracy,
Yeah.
where trust in institutions is what our entire society is predicated
Right.
on. If you don't
Right.
trust the police, if you don't trust the judges, if you don't trust the whatever, then like it's chaos.
Right.
That's why these systems exist.
Right.
So, you're asking the $1 million question, and I was invited last year to give a TEDx talk over in Nashville to talk about this issue and like how I'm navigating it. And so I have that over on my website on mo.news.
We'll put the link in our show notes. I'm excited to watch that.
And I'm not saying that after the 16-minute TEDx talk you'll have all the answers, but like at least you'll have a sense as to how we got here and where we're at.
Yeah.
I think the most important thing, frankly, and I know you guys are doing it on your podcast, is just full transparency. I feel like I come from a media world where like we need to show people we know what we're talking about no matter what. And guess what? You're going to get stuff wrong. And sometimes, frankly, you don't know what you're talking about. And I know behind the scenes you don't know what you're talking about. But on TV, you put forth, authority. Well, sometimes it's okay to say, listen, this is what we know. This is what we don't know. And I think there's an appeal there that you're seeing among certain podcasters on social media where let's just be real here for a second.
Yeah.
We're learning it with you.
Well, and I think what I really appreciate about what you do is it's not just like you'll show. I mean, if I were to go read like an article in the New York Times, it's going to take me a while, but also pulling out the actual really important pieces. Like, what is the takeaway? What does this all mean? And that's something that, again, I appreciate so much because it's the way that you explain the information as well, I think is like why people like it so much and why people kind of go to you over maybe like I will read your summary and then go to the New York Times after, but I feel like it's just the way that you distill the information. And Jen and I actually were talking about this in another podcast as well, that just I think a lot of times because there's so much information, people like to have, I mean, you were saying you check all these different Reuters and Bloomberg and a lot of people, again, everyone's like busy and they just want to know there is one trusted source. And so you are my news person. I was saying to Jen, like for like my pregnancy, there was this one awesome, I don't know if Alex has found this yet, but like there is this woman, Emily Oster, who wrote Expecting Better.
We follow her.
And I love her. I mean, the way that she like breaks down the data. And again, it's not that I don't trust my doctor. I do, but I appreciate also the why, the explanation. And I don't know. I think that is also something where it's like people are smart and they sometimes just they want to understand things and they want someone to explain it to them. And also like give them the reason for like why. and
by the way, sometimes there is no why, right?
That's true. That's true.
Just the way it is. But that's something I'm discovering. I mean, listen, my wife is 6 months pregnant now. We're due in September. And I've learned so much about why things are the way they are. And like, why is that done that way? And you're like, oh, just because we always have done that.
Right.
One doctor once said that. Or there's a shoddy study from the 1950s that found X, and that is why all women go through Y.
Yes.
And then even seeing comparatively, like, what are we doing in the U.S. versus the rest of the world?
I know.
When we talk about maternal health. And why do we have so many more C-sections? And, there's so many interesting questions that, candidly, until I entered this phase of fatherhood, I frankly wasn't really,
well, you were like, not my circus, not my monkeys. And then it's like, oh, wait, every single human on the planet has to be born. This might matter.
Yeah.
Well, totally. And then you have these huge decisions, whether it's like Roe v. Wade and other things that like are impacting and then you're covering state legislatures who are just like a bunch of state legislators who like have no experience with this, who haven't gotten any medical background or medical briefings, are making huge decisions with implications for women's lives.
Yeah. No,
that's so fascinating. And again, it's the same exact thing about, the same politicians who know nothing about the financial services industry making the decisions for, our economy.
We're watching it happen all over again with the fallout of Silicon Valley Bank, right? Like suddenly the Dodd-Frank hearings I was covering on Capitol Hill, where I was like chasing, it was so funny actually. I was chasing Barney Frank around in 2009 as he was like, we got to crack down on these banks. Okay, fast forward, Barney Frank sitting on the board of Signature Bank, which just got shut down. I'm like, wait, the congressman who was regulating the industry is sitting there at a bank that like just got shut down.
You couldn't make this up if you tried.
No.
Exactly. So I have a question for you. Something that my dad likes to talk about all the time is how AI is impacting all of these different industries that have historically required, I think, an exorbitant amount of brain power and creativity. How, if at all, I mean, I can't imagine the answer is not at all, but I'm curious if it is. Do you see this crazy asymptotic rise of AI across all these different platforms impacting news and how it's delivered and how it's communicated?
Yes, at some point. I don't think we're there yet. I think what is key to news is, I mean, I guess it depends on your taste too, but having a voice. When we go through journalism school or you start working in the industry, you develop a voice in terms of how you write, how you communicate, how you tell a story. AI is still very, regimented. Like you try to tell AI to have a personality, but it's not quite there yet. Now, it could be there in 6 months when we talk again, right? That's how quick this stuff is moving. I think, even I think about this, existentially, right? Like I've developed a niche, curating the news, aggregating the news for people, breaking things down. Can AI replace me at some point? Can AI do what I'm doing as a replacement? Or, frankly, how can I leverage AI
as an enhancement potentially? Step one.
Yeah. And I haven't, for my colleagues in kind of the national media and local media, I have not seen like full use implementation of AI for script writing, for story summaries, etc. Now, keep in mind, ChatGPT 4, just with the add-on recently, allowed you to have data beyond 2021. So for news, it was irrelevant until very, very recently because everything stopped.
Everything was aged.
But I played with it recently. I think it was the Gwyneth Paltrow trial. I was like, ChatGPT, write me a 4-paragraph summary of the latest of the Gwyneth Paltrow trial. And then I did it with Bard, with Google Bard, the competitor. By the way, Bard did a phenomenal job. ChatGPT is so-so. But I was like, oh my God, I could almost use this on my feed because the summary, they hit the key points. So, listen, I think in the news space, to get your headlines, if they can learn what Jennifer wants, what Kristen wants, I think there's an opportunity there. Does that potentially put, journalists out of a job? Mm-hmm. Yeah. At the same time, like all the people who like fearmonger on this stuff, I was like, well, there was a time before the printing press. There was a time before the car. There was a time before the plane. There was a time before the telegraph. There was a time before the fax machine. Time before the internet. We all kind of figured it out. Now, the transition itself is rough, right? Because people will have to learn new skill sets, and in the same way it'll replace jobs, ideally it'll also create jobs. That is, if AI doesn't completely destroy us, which,
Oh, yeah, which I'm in that camp. I'm in the Terminator camp. But I think you touched on something really interesting, which is, the concept of having a voice in relaying the news. And I think, too, what's lost in all of this is, as a consumer of news, it's oftentimes hard for us to remember that, hey, guess what? In order for you to be putting out this story on Instagram or whatever it is, somebody somewhere had to tell someone a story. And then that had to get told to another person, right? And there's this, human chain of telephone that happens in order for that information to get transmitted in the first place, right? There's not some AI overlord yet, at least, who's, sitting everywhere. Like there's an asymmetry of information. And that's where journalists, where salespeople, where anyone who's operating in that space adds value. And I think as long as that asymmetry of information is still part of the process, there's always going to be that human element that's completely necessary and I think irreplicable.
And I think there's something in Explain the News or Explaining Wall Street that like AI ain't replicating anytime soon. It's not the what happened. What happened AI can replicate. AI, tell me what happened. It's the why do I care? Does it matter to me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Like give me historical context that's relevant to me. Or the most significant question in news I've gotten in the last 3 years, should I be worried about this?
Yeah.
Should I be freaking out about this? Ask AI. Ask AI. You're like, well, I don't know if you should be freaking out about it.
Statistically, you have a 72% chance of whatever getting
dying.
Exactly. Whereas I followed this website during COVID called Stat News. I don't know if you guys were following it.
I didn't.
And it's like a data-based health website. And honestly, it became my go-to because of all the fear-mongering in the media about new variant. I mean, I'm still seeing it now. They're like, will there be a new outbreak of COVID? And I'm like, from July 4th. I was like, what year are we living in at this point, Ellen?
Right.
And Stat News was very data focused, and they were just looking at the numbers. And there were a couple times where like one of these new variants was like, I remember looking at Omicron out of South Africa.
That was
scary
scary initially.
Right, but then you look at the hospitalization numbers, which were not being well covered by American media out of South African sources, and they're like, no one's going to the hospital.
Right. Yeah.
And they're like, well, is it because South Africa has a younger population? I was like, no, my gut is we're overreacting on Omicron, like it's not Delta, like something has shifted.
Yeah.
And it turned out to be right. And it was data-based, and Stat News was just like, not saying don't be worried, but just like, let's look at the numbers, compared to the previous ones. And that's what we ended up discovering.
Right.
And so I think that if you just focus on the data when it comes to stories, that's important. That's where AI can help. But then kind of discerning that data and
without
the
that
meaning.
piece of your intuition that you mentioned, that data would have maybe had a totally different interpretation.
Well, it's interesting too, because I remember, and I was freaked out about like Omicron or COVID in general, because again, I was pregnant and I was just like, well,
most of Kristen's stories start with, I was pregnant.
I also have 3 kids. That's why. But no, it was, that was like from my lens. So it's funny because if you are someone who's sitting there like, I'm a pregnant woman and I want to know, is this going to harm my child? And there's no information. It's like, well, statistically, you're not going to die. Well, but is my child going to be born with like 2 heads? Like what's actually going to happen there? So it's funny because back to your point, it's like answering the question of, does it matter to me? That does it matter to me is the most critical part, because people,
And I have to say that, I felt like the health officials did a disservice when they reassured people when they had no information.
Right.
Whether it's the mask stuff, whether it's the, they didn't have data for you when you were pregnant, Kristen.
No, I remember.
They wanted to reassure you, don't worry, it'll be fine.
Yeah.
They didn't know.
Yeah.
And then that breeds distrust, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
I was just trying to find any raw data I could on, is this Zika? Like, what is this thing? And
and the only data we had was from China, which was lying about their data.
Exactly.
It's still funny looking at the chart of like deaths and cases worldwide, and China's like 7.
Yes.
You're like,
Yes.
we know.
Yeah.
Come on, China.
No,
we know better.
So many of our listeners are youths, are young people who are thinking about, the different industries that they're going to go into. Obviously, part of our goal is to educate people about opportunities in the financial services industry, but we don't care what they do, right? They can go anywhere. We just want them to be happy. Do you think that young people are, I remember when I was a wee young thing,
How are we defining young, by the way? Because I still feel pretty young today.
I know. Same.
I feel like I'm 1,000 years old, but that's because I haven't slept in 2 nights because my kid was sick. But yeah, get ready for that.
Oh, I know.
Although you're used to not sleeping.
Yeah,
I'm
that's
used to
true.
not sleeping. I've been training my whole life for
This
fatherhood.
is going to be the 3 a.m. news shift, only less vodka. Well, maybe.
Right.
It's
It's not going to be like there's a terror attack at X place. It'll be like, kid is sick. Kid can't sleep. I have
diaper
nightmare.
change,
Right.
stat.
Not like actual news nightmare, like nightmare in their head.
Oh
Like,
God,
right.
exactly. But so when we were coming of age, kind of in the late 90s, early 2000s, journalism was this incredibly aspirational thing. It was like, oh, so and so is a journalist. Like they are part of this, I think, like well-respected intellectual elite, like who have so much insight and skill and knowledge. And I'm curious as to your take. We talked a little bit about the role of mistrust in all of this, but there are still, I think, like very well-respected, well-liked people in the news out there these days. Clearly, you've become one of them in helping democratize the news for so many people. Do you see young people coming up into that career, and like what is the path for them now? And is that different from what it used to be when you were, say, manning the wires?
Yeah, significantly in terms of options. So there was a traditional route that you took in journalism, where you might begin in local news, move your way through the markets. And by markets, I mean size of markets. So like the biggest media market is New York, number 1, LA is 2, Chicago is 3, Houston is 4. But you'd begin in like market 150, like Poughkeepsie. You move your way through the markets, you're doing the 5 a.m. show, the noon show, and the 9 p.m. show. You're getting paid $18,000 a year. By the way, you're still getting paid $18,000 a year 20 years later. And then you eventually make your way to network. If you are off air, like a producer, you might be able to start at network level. I was very lucky to be able to go to school in Washington, D.C. and get an internship at a national network and immediately jump into that whole world. And so there are opportunities there. Now, the great thing about social media now is, and you guys were just talking about TikTok at the beginning of this, is that you have the ability to create your own channel.
Right.
I did it. You've done it. I meet kids now. I speak at high schools where kids have their own podcasts already. And I'm like, how many downloads are you getting? I'm like, oh my,
Probably
you're
way
doing
more
that.
than we are.
Yeah.
I have some 14-year-olds to introduce you to.
Yeah.
And,
Can't wait.
That's, how does Charlie D'Amelio and some of these like TikTokers start? Like they start in high school, like dancing on TikTok.
Yep.
If only when I, in the mid 90s, had the ability to have my own media, you can start your own newsletter for free. You can start your own podcast for free. You can pick your social media platform of choice, whether it's YouTube or Instagram or TikTok. Start doing what it is you're passionate about already on your own.
Yeah.
Because guess what? It's reversing itself. At some point, and we're already here in terms of the major media brands looking to the creators
Yeah.
to be like, give me some of that juju. Let me hire you. I want
Right.
your audience.
Right.
And I sit here with like at NBC or CNN or whatever.
Yeah.
So my recommendation to anybody is if you're passionate about journalism, news, creating of any sort, whether it's lifestyle content or hard news content or financial content, etc., you have all the platforms at your disposal to start to build that.
Right.
Now, of course, nothing quite replaces the training that you would get at one of these organizations.
Yes.
The expertise, and also just like improving your writing, improving how to tell a story. And that's where working at a major organization,
Right.
don't sit there and be like, well, I have 500,000 followers.
Yep.
Great, mazel tov. At the same time, you can always be better.
Right.
You can always write better. You can always write tighter. You can always tell a story better.
Right.
And, that's something I was so thankful for when I was at CBS News. I was there for 10 years.
Yeah.
And some of the people I got to work with there, came from the school of Walter Cronkite, right? And like I can explain the Middle East to you in 60 seconds. I can explain really complex subjects for a mass audience at home because they've done it for decades.
Yeah.
And what's better than 5 words? 3 words. You know
Right.
what's better than 3 words?
Yes.
1 word.
Yeah.
And learning to be able to do that
Yes.
in a concise way, in a straightforward way, you can't figure that out on your own. That's where you do need that,
Yeah.
We always talk about that Winston Churchill quote, right? Like, I'm sorry I wrote a long speech. I didn't have time to write a short one, right?
Well, because Jen and I have been trying to do this because, again, like we're trying to take these complex topics that are just, let's explain, again, a DCF, a leverage buyout, a merger, and do it in a way that is, going to grab someone's attention who's swiping in like the first 3 seconds, and B,
The
is
hook,
concise
they
enough,
call
right?
it.
The hook.
The hook.
And then B, concise enough that they'll actually learn something in 3 minutes. I mean, I used to teach this stuff and I would have 9 to 5 for 10 days. And now it's like, I need to teach this in 3 minutes.
And that's still, there's still a place for that. And we still need
absolutely.
that kind of teaching. But everyone wants these nuggets, for everything in their life now, not just news headlines, but everyone wants, how do I become a master chef by watching 3 Instagram videos? How do I become, a professional pickleball player by watching a YouTube video?
Or based on my Instagram algorithm recently, how do I become the best father ever?
Yes.
And like,
Aww.
they've learned me quickly. Like I'm waking up and I'm like sending various things to my wife, and she's like, "Yeah, I've seen that one. Yeah, I know that." I'm like, "Look at how this person like does the diaper change."
Your feeds are all synced up. Kristen and I share a social media account for our business, so now I get the stuff that's directed at her, and she gets the stuff that's directed at me.
I get the real estate stuff, and she's getting like big time adulting.
And by the real estate stuff, it's also like how to make this cocktail recipe.
Right.
How to deep fry a croissant.
Well,
like
more
really, well, this has been absolutely incredible, Mosheh. Is there anything that you'd like to touch on that we didn't hit on that you think is critical for our listeners to understand about your work, your goals, what you're kind of looking to accomplish next?
I think that, first of all, it was great to connect with you two, and I'm looking forward to, whether it's the next financial crisis or any story, having a relationship with you guys.
Totally.
It's important for us to find like-minded people that are all, have the same goal, which is to like inform and educate, but do it in a conversational way.
Yeah.
Like I like to explain to people who work with me, I'm like, explain this to your grandmother.
Yes, that's what I say. That's exactly what we say. And I'm like, by the way, my grandma was not in the financial services industry.
Explain a credit default swap to your grandmother.
Yes.
Right?
Yep. Yes.
Explain the Supreme Court to your grandmother. Explain, the Trump indictment to your grandmother.
Right.
And so, I think like the more of us out there doing this, I think that's partially the solution to misinformation and distrust. That like,
Oh, I love
and
that.
we're fighting the good fight because by the way, there's a lot of people out there who like are putting out not just bad information, but like actually doing harmful information.
Yep.
And that upsets me to no end. And, it's one of the things that led me to this at the beginning of COVID. I remember my wife getting a text message from somebody being like, they're going to lock down all the bridges to New York.
I remember that.
Martial law. I'm like, no, they're not. I have somebody at NYPD and DHS. They would never do that.
Yeah.
You're like, also, they're still running those stupid nuclear simulation on the same timer. You really think that they're going to sync up a lockdown of all the bridges? They can get their act together.
I go, you think New York City could lock down Manhattan? Like,
I know.
have you lived? Like, first of all, you guys all live in New York. You know better than this. They can't lock down.
They'd all be
No.
stuck in traffic trying to get to the meeting to talk about locking down the bridges. Forget it.
And so, like, that was one of my first posts. Like,
Yeah.
it's like,
Brilliant.
everyone,
Yeah.
stop spreading misinformation.
Yep.
Or in this case, it turned out to be disinformation because of the Chinese government trying to mess with us to sow chaos in our society.
Right.
Anyway, long story short, the answer to your question. You can follow me over at Mosheh, at MOSHEH, over on Instagram. We try to cover 20, 30 stories a day. I put out a morning podcast. It's out every morning about 4:45 a.m. The Mo News podcast, 2 words, MO News. We have a newsletter where we do a deep dive into one subject every day, the Mo newsletter. You can find all of that at mo.news. So, I would love if anyone listening to this follows me. I love feedback. So please, I try to answer as many direct messages as I can.
Yep.
The respectful ones, the mean ones.
You answered ours. We were like fangirling.
I know. No, if our listeners get nothing else out of this, go follow Mosheh. He is unbelievable. I mean, like,
forget
he
about
is.
finance. Go learn about the world.
Well, no, I think we're tag teaming this.
There we go.
You guys are going to manage all the finance stuff, and you're like, for Ukraine,
Yep.
Go over to Mosh.
Well, no, and again, for so many people, we did do an episode on understanding what happened with Silicon Valley Bank and First Republic Bank because, again, even so many of the smartest people in our industry are like, wait, what happened with that? I wasn't really paying attention. Like,
The
what's
smartest
going
people in the
on?
industry are one of the reasons that collapsed the bank. I mean,
Right.
I am a customer of, RIP First Republic
So are we, yeah.
that was bought by J.P. Morgan.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
why did that happen? Well, a variety of factors, but partially some of the smartest people in finance on their Telegram threads and WhatsApp threads, like, brought down these banks.
Forgot how to
I was-
hedge.
It was like a run on the bank. No, that was the whole First Republic. Yeah.
And by the way, is that over yet? I don't know.
I know.
But and then suddenly, I remember covering Credit Suisse and being in Zurich and covering Credit Suisse and UBS in 2009, 2010. And I'm like, oh my God, like UBS was able to buy credits. Like
One of those doesn't exist anymore. And how did
What?
this happen? And what was the Swiss government doing? Maybe you can explain what the Swiss government was thinking.
I'm going to defer to you. I'm going to kick that back over to you guys.
But no, this has been incredible. We are so grateful for you. Your insight is invaluable, and we are definitely bringing you back on for the next big thing to explain because
Well,
we are.
we have 18 months of this election, so I'm happy to come back and
After it's well, thank
try
you.
to explain this one.
Thank you.
Congratulations to you on all your success and growing your family. We're so thrilled for you, and thank you again for your time.
Yeah, thank
Thanks
you
for
so
having me
much.
on.
Thank you.
All right, take care.
Good luck. Bye.
Bye.